It was one of those blistering hot summer days, the kind where the sun seemed to bake the earth beneath it. The small town of Willow Creek lay under a shimmering haze, the air thick with the scent of wildflowers and the distant hum of cicadas. Maria had been up since dawn, working on her family's farm, milking cows and preparing the fresh milk for sale. By mid-morning, she had set up her small roadside stand on the edge of town, just off the main road that connected Willow Creek to the neighboring villages. Maria had been selling milk here for years. She was in her late 20s now, with long brown hair often tied back in a simple braid, and a face that carried both the softness of youth and the hard lines of someone who had seen her share of struggles. Her stand wasn't anything fancy, just a sturdy wooden table with a bright red umbrella overhead to shield her from the sun. Crates filled with glass bottles of milk were stacked neatly around her, each bottle gleaming in the sunlight. The regulars from town, people she had come to know well, often stopped by on their way to work or school, exchanging pleasantries and catching up on the latest town gossip. As the day wore on, Maria noticed the usual ebb and flow of customers, mothers with young children, farmers returning from the fields, even the occasional traveler passing through town. But as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the road, she saw a figure approaching that was unlike the usual crowd. A young boy, no older than 10 or 11, was making his way down the road. He was a slight figure, his clothes worn and dusty, his shoes barely holding together. His hair was tousled, and his face, though still bearing the roundness of childhood, was marked with dirt and exhaustion. What struck Maria most were his eyes, deep, brown eyes that held a mix of desperation and weariness, far too much for someone his age. The boy hesitated as he neared the stand, his gaze flicking nervously between the bottles of milk and the few crumpled bills clutched tightly in his hand. He stood there, uncertain, as if he was trying to calculate whether he had enough money or if it was even worth asking. Maria watched him for a moment, her heart aching with a familiar pang. She knew what it was like to feel desperate, to be young and uncertain of where your next meal might come from. Without a word, Maria picked up one of the bottles of milk and stepped around the stand, kneeling down to the boy's level. He looked up at her, startled, as she offered him the bottle with a gentle smile. "Here," she said softly. "Take it." The boy hesitated, looking down at the few dollars in his hand, then back at Maria. He seemed torn, as if accepting the milk without paying in full was somehow wrong. Maria noticed this and shook her head. "It's okay," she assured him. "You don't need to pay. In fact." She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a $5 bill. It was all she had on her at the moment, but it didn't matter. She pressed the money into the boy's hand, folding his fingers around it gently. "Get yourself something to eat," she said. The boy stared at her in disbelief, his eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and confusion. He nodded slowly, clutching the milk and the money as if they were treasures. He managed to mumble a quiet thank you before turning and hurrying down the road, his small figure quickly swallowed by the distance. Maria stood there for a moment, watching him go, her heart heavy with concern. She hoped he would be okay, that he would find whatever he was looking for. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the landscape, she knew that life would move on, just as it always did. Years passed, and life for Maria changed in ways both big and small. Her little roadside stand became something of a fixture in Willow Creek. The townsfolk came to rely on her for fresh milk, and her friendly, warm demeanor made her well loved by many. She eventually married a kind, hard-working man named David, and together they had 2 children. The stand grew alongside her family, becoming a cherished part of the community. Though the work was hard, Maria found a sense of fulfillment in her daily routine, knowing she was providing for her family. But there were times, late at night when the house was quiet, and her children were asleep, that Maria would think back to that young boy. She wondered where he had gone, what had become of him. Had he found a home? Was he safe? The memory of his haunted eyes stayed with her, a reminder of the fragility of life and the impact a single moment of kindness could have. 15 years later, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, something extraordinary happened. The morning had started like any other. Maria, now in her early 40s, was setting up her stand with the help of her eldest daughter, Sophia. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the familiar rhythm of the day was unfolding just as it always had. but as noon approached, a sleek black car pulled up to the stand, an uncommon sight in the small, rural town. Maria noticed the car immediately, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. The door opened, and a man stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit that seemed out of place in the dusty surroundings. He was tall, with dark hair neatly styled, and a confident yet humble air about him. As he approached the stand, Maria felt a strange sense of familiarity, though she couldn't quite place where she knew him from. The man stopped in front of her, a warm smile spreading across his face. Maria, still puzzled, returned the smile, her curiosity piqued. "Maria," he began, his voice rich and steady. "You may not remember me, but I've never forgotten you." At his words, a flicker of recognition sparked in Maria's mind. Those eyes, though now filled with confidence and gratitude, were the same deep brown eyes that had looked at her with such desperation all those years ago. "You." Maria's voice trailed off, her hand coming to her mouth in disbelief. The memory of that day came rushing back to her, as vivid as if it had happened just yesterday. "Yes," the man nodded. "I was that boy you gave milk to, the one you gave $5 to when I had nothing. I've thought about that moment every day since then. It was your kindness that changed everything for me." He went on to tell her his story, how after that day, he had found the strength to keep going. With the milk and money she had given him, he was able to make it to the next town, where he found shelter and eventually a foster family who took him in. He worked hard, driven by the memory of her kindness, finishing school and earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. Now, he was a successful entrepreneur, traveling the world and making a name for himself in the business world. But no matter how far he went or how much he achieved, he never forgot the woman who had shown him a small act of kindness when he needed it most. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she listened to his story. She had always believed in helping others, but she never imagined the impact such a small gesture could have. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her. "This is for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not just money, it's my way of saying thank you for everything you did for me when you didn't have to." Maria opened the envelope to find a check inside, a substantial amount that left her speechless. She looked up at him, overwhelmed with gratitude, but also with a deep sense of humility. "I don't know what to say," she managed, her voice trembling. "Thank you seems so small in comparison." The man shook his head, smiling gently. "No, Maria, thank you. You showed me that there is good in the world, even when it seems like there's none. You changed my life, and I'll never forget that." As he said his goodbyes and drove away, Maria stood there, the envelope clutched in her hands, her heart full. She knew that her life, and the lives of her children, would be forever changed by this unexpected gift. But more than that, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her simple act of kindness had come full circle in the most beautiful and unexpected way. The sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the stand, the road, and the fields beyond. Maria looked out at the horizon, a smile on her lips, and a sense of peace in her heart. She had always believed that kindness was its own reward, but today, she had been given something far greater, a reminder that every small act of goodness can ripple out into the world in ways we can never predict. And that, she knew, was the true gift.